Hello and welcome to The Agenda here on Labour Social with me, Graham Hughes, and Phil Morehouse. How you doing, Phil?
Hello,
You
I'm
all right?
well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you had a good week?
Yes, my foot's better. So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Glad to know you're not still hobbling around. Have you got better
No.
shoes now?
Well, I had better shoes before. I just will never wear those boots again. My partner's gone and given them to someone else.
Oh, did you not burn them in the backyard?
No, I wasn't allowed to.
As a
It's
warning.
wasteful, apparently.
So we're going to talk a little bit today. We were just discussing this before we came online about the fact that if you are a Tory MP or any MP for that matter, it's a bit crazy that you can be accused of doing horrific things, and not only if you get arrested, is that kept secret now? It never used to be. That was a rule they changed in 2016. It was a cross-party committee, wasn't it? That put in.
Oh yeah, there was at the time I checked. There was literally only one MP who objected to that rule change. So it was absolutely cross-party. But I don't see how it's in any MP's in any party's interest that rule was changed.
Right.
Because it removes more trust in politics.
Well, yeah, absolutely it does. Well, we were saying, I mean, if it's a private business and you were found, like Peter Bone has been found to have actually assaulted someone in your staff, like literally hit them and driven them to the brink of doing something, that you don't want them to do.
Yeah.
You get suspended pending an investigation, don't you? Isn't that normal?
When it works properly, yes. I mean, there are obviously situations where even in private industry, things get covered up. Like the CBI, for example, is collapsing because they ended up with a load of that going on. But yeah, generally speaking, in most organisations, yes, you would be instantly suspended at the very least. You wouldn't be doing any of your duties. That would be it. Because of the risk of if you then someone's brought this to your attention that this person has behaved in this way, and you don't necessarily know it's true, but if it is true and you have allowed them to carry on with any of their duties to the point where they could continue to carry out those offences, you would be in a whole heap of shit.
Yeah, exactly. Quite rightly as well. But in Parliament, it's just
But no one's responsible in Parliament either. And like we were saying just before we came online, the problem in Parliament is like the government can make anyone else legally responsible for certain people under them, whatever. The same thing can't exist in politics. You can't have a mechanism whereby someone could just use it to remove a political opponent. But also, no one's really responsible for an MP because the deal is that an MP is elected by their constituents. We think about party leaders and things like that having responsibility, but the party system isn't fundamentally a part of our system of electing MPs. It just sits alongside it as a campaigning tool. So like this is, for example, why an MP, if they have the whip withdrawn. So Peter Bone has had the whip withdrawn.
And he's been suspended. Well,
he has now been suspended as well.
6 weeks.
But I mean, that was quite interesting because I still can't get it in my head how Peter Bone, when that news broke last week, that wasn't him being found guilty. He'd already been found guilty. That was his appeal failing. So he still had the whip even after he'd been found guilty. But again, even if Rishi Sunak had removed the whip when he should have done, that is still an MP. He's still an MP. And if he'd committed some offence whereby he was only suspended for like a week or something, he wouldn't even be facing a recall petition.
So when they are suspended, that's just suspended from Parliament, isn't it? They just can't turn up on the Westminster estate. So they can still work in their surgery.
They're still their MP, yes, they're still MPs. But at least the public will know what they've done. So it's then up to those members of the public. I mean, it's up to those members of the public whether they decide they actually want to go to that MP. The problem is, so this is why I am very much against the idea of anonymity in this case, because you can look at it. My partner, for example, was saying, well, because MPs might be particularly affected by malicious accusations, Although there's no evidence of it. I don't think there's any evidence that this actually happens. It's a bit like, the old voter ID thing. Oh, but people could fiddle. It's like, yeah, but there's no evidence that they do.
But hardly anyone does. And
yeah.
the punishment for doing something like that, wasting police time, would be a prison sentence. So why would you set yourself up for a prison sentence?
Yeah. But nonetheless, the idea is that they're in this in the public eye, and so they should have greater rights and anonymity. But it's like, but what about the other members? That's thinking about the MP. In isolation, you go, yes. But what about vulnerable members? I mean, an MP, if no one knows that they are being investigated for something this serious, they're going to schools, they're going to hospitals. They're like, they've got proper Jimmy Savile level access to all sorts of things.
Jesus, that's not a great expression, is it?
No, but that is the reality of being an MP. And also, what is their job in their constituency? It's to help people in distress. So it's to help vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So you cannot have a situation where someone, like, in a way I likened it, if you imagine that you knew in your region that a teacher was being investigated for rape, and then you also learned that no one's allowed to talk about it or name them because of the law, and they're still carrying on, and no one knows who they are, you'd be livid. You wouldn't.
This wouldn't happen, would it?
That would be full public backlash. But an MP is in a much greater position to abuse vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So why they absolutely should be named. And the fact that, to be fair to him, Crispin Blunt has come out immediately and said, it's me. For what, I don't know for what reason. I don't know whether he said why he said that, whether it's just to stop the speculation or because that's the other thing. When something like this happens and you take anonymity, several of your colleagues could be suspected.
Yes.
Because inevitably people want to know if it's their MP, and I mean, realistically, before he came out and said it's me, we narrowed it down to 2 people anyway. There are only 2 people that fit the descriptions.
Yeah, because it was someone in their 60s and he was arrested by the Surrey police.
Yeah, I mean, the offence could have been in Surrey rather than it be a Surrey MP, but there's not a lot of reasons for many MPs to be. If it was in London, it'd be different. That could just be their part. There's also like parliamentary second home. You'd sort of narrowed it down to 2, which is then unfair because then someone who is innocent. I mean, they might both be innocent, but nonetheless. So it does that a disservice. And then the other problem is, and this is what I try to say. So Crispin Blunt now, let's say he's innocent, right? He's buggered, completely buggered. There's now no decent outcome for him. And it's all a result of the fact that we have things like this that make people mistrust politicians. Let us say that this investigation drags on, which it easily could. Well, he can't stand for the Conservatives in the general election. You can't have a suspected rapist standing for you. And if they did, I don't know how safe his seat is. I haven't looked. I know it's sorry. But, but that'd be a mad situation to allow. So he's basically, unless this ends quickly and with no charges, he can't stand in for the general election. But let's say it does end.
There is
quickly.
Another MP who was arrested last May 2022. Who everyone seems to know who it is. We can't say it on the show, obviously, but Tory MP arrested for indecent assault and rape, and he's standing in the next election, apparently.
I think that's a bit mad because people, we all know who it is. Everyone knows. Locally, they'll know who it is. And the problem is, let's say that there are then no charges, and it's all dropped. The investigation's over, and the police are satisfied, and all the rest of it. Because the charge rate for rapes is so low, wouldn't it just always be hanging over him? People will be thinking, well, how do we know you're just not one of the many who gets away with it because the charge rate is so poor?
Yeah.
So he'll always have this over him now, no matter what the outcome, because, the criminal justice system is so poorly resourced for dealing with that particular offence, especially.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, in your video earlier, you said that it takes, might take 2 years if this ever goes to court.
It can be more.
Then there's an appeal at the end of it. But it's also a drugs charge as well. And I think that is pretty, if they find, because they're doing tests on the substances that were found, or the substance that was found on Crispin Blunt. If that's found to be cocaine, I think that's it. That it'll just be sacked straight away.
Well, Um, I mean, again, there is no sacking, is there? Will Parliament suspend him for that?
Well, yeah, they have to. I mean, surely they have to. That being arrested by the police for drugs possession would get you thrown out of your college, or you get thrown out of your university. I mean, this they can't be making the law and breaking the law. No matter how you feel about drugs laws.
Well, they do. The current and previous, well, if we ignore Liz Truss, the current and previous Prime Minister have both been given police fines, which is a criminal conviction, whilst Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak for, a motoring offence, and Boris Johnson for breaking his own pissing law offence.
But I think people would look at that as misdemeanors rather than something that people actually
they
go to jail
would,
for.
but nonetheless, that is still breaking the law.
There's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be absolutely raging if this posh, privileged, privately educated old white man gets away with a crime that they've gone to jail for because they aren't white or they aren't rich.
Well, the thing is, but he could still face like a trial, for example. But that would take a very long time, and there would be an appeal. Like you look at, I was just thinking about this. Like Claudia Webb, she's still an MP, isn't she? She was actually given.
What did she do?
She was like, it was basically like assault. She ran a campaign, like really being like threatening, wasn't she? Ran a threatening campaign, and she was convicted, and she was given a custodial sentence, suspended. Yeah. But because she's appealing for it, and I can't understand why this appeal's taking so long. I don't get it. She
was Labour MP.
Yeah. And that's still going on. As soon as that appeal fails, I don't know why it's taking this long. As soon as that appeal fails, then she can have a recall petition issued, because if you get a custodial sentence, then that's recall petition territory. If it's a custodial sentence of a year or more, then you are there is no recall petition. You are actually just recalled automatically. But if it's less than a year, or if it's a suspended sentence,
there's some really nasty stuff that I'm reading about that offence that she did. I mean, it was for harassment. That she was charged, and she lost the Labour whip, obviously. But she's still. You're right. She's still an MP, independent,
because she's appealing. She's being convicted, but she's appealing. And this appeal, I mean, that I don't understand how an appeal like this takes this long. But so the same thing would happen here, even for these drug charges. Even if he was, it would take ages to come to trial. If the CPS decide to prosecute, it would take ages to come to trial. And then if he's convicted, he can appeal.
Well, it's not going to go to that, because I'm just reading this. Her appeal was dismissed on the 26th of May last year. Though her sentence was reduced. The judge found but as Webb's reduced sentence was not custodial, it did not trigger a constituency recall petition.
I've completely missed that. That's okay. That makes more sense. I couldn't understand how the appeal was taking so long. So she's basically won on appeal, then, hasn't she? She hasn't quashed.
No, she lost the appeal.
Well, she's won because she's got it changed from a custodial sentence.
To community service, 80 hours of community service. And the compensation was reduced from £1,000 to 50 quid.
But then you look at that. So she's not facing a parliamentary investigation where she should be suspended, and neither would he. Because as far as they're concerned, that's a matter for the criminal justice system to determine the punishment.
Wow. So basically, this was Claudia Webb. Her partner was having an affair with another woman, and the harassment was between 2018 and 2020 against this woman. I mean, talk about airing your dirty laundry in public. Not great. But yeah, that seems insane to me that she is still an MP.
Well, she won't be after the election.
People going to her and saying, I'm scared of my partner. I'm scared of being stalked. I'm being harassed at work. And what you said earlier about when an MP doesn't come forward and people think, well, it must be one of these four people or whoever it is. You are not going to go if you were a single vulnerable woman who has just got out of a toxic relationship and needs some support. You wouldn't go to your MP if you thought they might be one of them four.
exactly.
So it doesn't just affect the other MPs that might be accused of it. It also affects the
Well,
constituents.
that is my thing. What MPs have done is to prioritise themselves and their mates over the public. And like MPs should be a public service. It's like, yes, it is really, if you are innocent and you are accused of something maliciously, it's absolutely awful. I absolutely get that. But at the same time, you have to put the public interest ahead of it.
Yeah.
That MP
absolutely.
has the option of just resigning if something like that happens.
Yeah.
And if they're innocent, they shouldn't do, but they have that option. What do members of the public have the option to do if they think that maybe their MP is the one who's been accused, or if they don't know and they are actually guilty and they put themselves in a vulnerable position?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, that happened with Chris Pincher, didn't it? He was still an MP for a very long time. Why would anyone go to him who was feeling vulnerable? It just it robs a whole constituency of their agency in that
the Chris Pincher just highlights the hypocrisy of MPs in this regard, because the reason why Boris Johnson fell was because Tory MPs were saying, hang on a minute, when we are harassed, you're telling us to go to Chris Pincher. That's not acceptable. But they think it is acceptable that an ordinary member of the public would go to an MP with a similar thing. So that was actually hypocrisy. That was them saying, we're prepared to bring the government down because we don't think it's right that we should have someone who's accused of these things or even guilty of these things being in that position where we have to go to them. Yet they think it's right for the public to be in that position. Much more vulnerable members of the public.
I just want to say a big thank you to One Angry Pagan there for the £5 super chat. I'm going to come on to this in a moment, One Angry Pagan, but first of all, I'll just read all the super chats. As I was only born at the end of '93, I have little idea of how this compares to the last downfall of the Tories. Is it worse now than it was then? I think we should pick this up as the next thing to talk about. We had a comment earlier asking what we were going to do after Labour, if Labour win the next election, which is looking pretty likely. Are we going to continue our channels? I will say absolutely yes. Phil, are you continuing making videos about politics?
I always say I don't know how things will change, but the channel will absolutely continue.
Yeah. We might not get so many viewers. Today, nothing interesting happened. But we'll see how we get on. And Captain Bart Roberts, £5 super chat, thank you. Is Blunt related to the fifth man from the spy catcher thing? I don't know. He's related to Emily Blunt.
It's a common name.
Emily Blunt is his niece. And Gardy, £2. Have you heard Starmer is starting a podcast? News to me. No.
It's news to me. He's not, surely, is he?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how successful that would be. I don't know. Because he's not very interesting. To have a successful podcast, you need to at least have one interesting person. A charismatic person.
I mean, maybe he would be in a podcast. Who knows? Or maybe he's going to have a decent
Well, he did a good podcast with James O'Brien when he did the full disclosure.
The full disclosure,
that was one of the best interviews he's ever done because he came across as quite amiable and normal.
Yeah.
A lot of his delivery is quite stilted. He always looks like he's on the verge of tears.
Wow.
But going back to One Angry Pagan's question, how do you think? Because you're only a few years older than me. You remember 92 and 97, don't you?
Yes.
Was 97 the first election that you voted in?
Yes.
Yes, it was the first election I voted in as well. How do you think it compares?
So the situation these days is the Tories are. I mean, not only are they much worse, but the public feel it's much worse. Like, you can't separate out the economic situation ever. A government will always get the blame for a bad economic situation, whether it's fair or not. And in this case, it is. Yes, there are other things going on as well, but it is, they are absolutely taking the piss. So they're much worse. The level, I mean, we had Tory sleaze back in the 90s. This goes beyond sleaze. This is just, I don't even know what this is. They're not even, it goes beyond corruption into something, it's depravity. It's Tory depravity.
With John Major's cabinet, with his
basically affairs.
When they got found out,
stuff.
Cash for questions and affairs. But when they got found out, they stood down.
Yeah.
A lot of them stood down.
Neil Hamilton had to be taken out by Martin Bell, but yeah.
I remember the big one was the Monmouth by-election just before. I think that was maybe '96, and that was a big win for Labour, and it looked like the time was up for the Tories at that point. But I think that considering looking at the economy was so much better in the 1990s if you're looking at growth than it's been for the last 13 years of Tory government. So, it's much worse for the Tories now. And I honestly, unless something drastic changes over the next few months, I could see them getting less than 100 seats in this upcoming election. Don't forget, they got 150 odd seats in 97, and that was the biggest, landslide against them ever.
I mean, with first past post, it is quite tricky. Like, I was reading an analysis from YouGov. Actually, they presented something completely out of context. I'm a bit surprised at them. They usually do quite a good job. And they were talking about, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but it was some lead comparing sort of just before 97 and now. But it ignores the fact that there's so many more parties now. So in 96, 97, if you looked at the polling, well, if you looked at voting intention polling, 90% of all the voting intention was split between Labour, the Conservatives, and the Lib Dems.
Yeah.
In fact, it's much more than 90%. But virtually everyone was going to vote for either Labour, the Conservatives, or the Lib Dems. Whereas now it's a much smaller figure. Obviously, the majority still vote for either Labour or the Conservatives, but it's a much smaller figure because you've also got way more people voting for the Green Party, way more for Plaid and the SNP. And now you've got Reform UK in the mix. At the time, you didn't even have UKIP. So, or at least it might have existed. I mean, there was things like the Referendum Party and stuff like that. It was just starting to grow, this sort of anti-EU specific movement. But yeah, almost everyone was going to either vote Labour, Liberal Democrats, or Conservative. Whereas now that's not the case. So when you're trying to compare the lead now and then, it's not really comparable, because Labour and the Conservatives both are fighting more parties for those votes, and Labour especially.
Yeah. I mean, just to say thank you again to One Angry Pagan for another super chat. I don't really want to start attacking Starmer, but it seems he has put much of the Muslim community's nose out of joint.
I'm going to pick on that. That's not actually true. It's a perception. So, for example, there's been a lot of momentum-driven shit over this. And for example, there was a poll apparently came out going, "Oh, Labour have basically lost 95% of their support amongst the Muslim population." It was a Twitter poll, right? It was a Twitter poll. It's not a serious poll, but the thing is,
anyone left on Twitter?
Because there's so many people driving this. But when you actually look at it, first of all, it's actually quite Islamophobic to even have this notion that the Muslim population votes as one. It doesn't. All the actual sensible polling shows, no, it doesn't. It votes on perfectly normal things like everyone else. So it hasn't. What it has done is obviously it's created uncomfortable positions for a lot of Labour politicians, particularly councillors. The messaging hasn't been handled great, but at the same time, it is, again, these momentum and similar groups, the anti-Starmer groups, who have just been kicking up shit from the start. At the end of the day, it's all getting tricky. It's not helped. I think it's not helped. Like Sadiq Khan today, for example, joining these calls for a ceasefire. And I just wish people were a bit more honest about why you can't do that. And it is, I know it's confusing for people. If I say, by you calling for a ceasefire, you're actually killing more Palestinians, but that is the fact of the matter, and I'll explain why. Nothing we can do can impose a ceasefire. We can't get Israel to impose a ceasefire. They're not reliant on us for anything at all. We do sell weapons to them, but America sells weapons to them. Israel doesn't need those weapons. What's happening right now is that Israel have got it into their heads that Hamas need to be taken out, and that's what they're going to do. And it's going to get way worse because this is going to take months. They've made their minds up now. They're going in and they're going to take Hamas out, come what may. As far as they're concerned, this is a new Holocaust and they are the Nazis. And that's how they're describing it. And nothing can stop it. No one can stop them. Israel's got all the military might it needs to do it. And all Hamas want to do is to try and pull someone else in, like Iran. If that happens, America will directly join in. So that's not happening. But from Britain's point of view, we can do nothing in terms of arranging a ceasefire. But what will happen if we call for a ceasefire? Exactly the same thing will happen to us. As think about it, it's not like no one's calling for a ceasefire. What has happened with absolutely every political leader that's called for a ceasefire? Israel have gone completely loopy at them. So if that happens to us, what's the consequence? We have zero chance of getting that humanitarian aid in. We're already struggling, but that is our focus at the moment. You know, the UK government has two jobs: one, to get British nationals out, and two, to get humanitarian aid in. That's all we can do. And we need Israel's cooperation for both of those things. So if we piss them off, we can't. So that means more Palestinians will die than needs to be the case. And it's a terrible situation to be in, but that is the reality of the situation. So if we call for a ceasefire, like if the UK government calls for a ceasefire, people say, oh, but it's making a stand. Yeah, but it's also killing more innocent people, because that is aid that we are trying to provide that we'll now not get in.
So why can't Starmer do it, though? Because he's not the government?
Because, yes, it's absolutely true. Because he's not a member of the government, it doesn't cause as big an international diplomatic incident, but it can still. But the second reason is Labour are basically saying we should be the government, that the Conservatives have done, the public have finished with them. If there was a general election today, Keir Starmer would be the Prime Minister tomorrow. So he has to act as if he is in government now. Instead, it's this classic thing. Do we want to be a party of protest, or do we want to be a party of government? And if you want to be a party of government, you have to act like the party of government, even when you're in opposition. Because again, what are you doing by calling for a ceasefire? You're just making things easy for yourself, while suggesting that the UK government abandon innocent Palestinians that are trapped in Gaza. And it's a very uncomfortable situation. But I don't know why people think calling for a ceasefire does anything. Is it this British exceptionalism thing again? That, we were this.
No, I don't see it as something that will change anything in Israel or in Palestine. I see it as something that will diffuse a lot of the criticism of Labour from the usual quarters. But a lot of those people are generally ignored. But now that this is all kicking off, a lot of people are getting this into their feed. They're getting it into their heads that they won't even call for a ceasefire. How dare they not do that? And I think that's dangerous.
But
so
that
it's
is
a
because
tightrope.
no one is explaining it.
Well, then again, we're going back to Labour comms, and just Labour's comms they never explain this. Why should it be up to you to explain this to Labour voters?
But I mean, the other problem is, of course, like politically, like people are over-egging, oh, this would cost Labour loads of votes. No, it might cause a schism in the party in terms of not even MPs, but councillors. And some of them, like some of the councillors that resigned, are just momentum stooges and like Sodom. But some of them are good councillors, I gather. And it is a shame that people, but it needs explaining to them that you've got to be real here. It's not like, if it made no difference either way, I would say yes, call for a ceasefire, because first of all, it's the right thing to do if you could do it. And second of all, if it's not going to make a difference either way, you are at least presenting what your position is.
Well, exactly.
But it does make a difference. But it does make a difference, because if you do that, then Israel will not cooperate. And at the moment, think about Rishi
maybe
Sunak
if Rishi Sunak does it, they won't cooperate. But then that's on Rishi Sunak's back. No, it's not on.
But that's cowardice. Keir Starmer wants to be the Prime Minister, and he wants to be the Prime Minister as soon as possible. It's absolute cowardice to back a position just to make a few people feel better. And also think about the other way, because the focus is on the people who want the ceasefire. What about the people who view a ceasefire as, oh, so you want Israel to just abandon their hostages then? Because that's how it'll be characterized by way more people as well. Like at the moment, you've got this thing in Labour where it's been massively amplified. This opposition to Starmer's position, it's been amplified. First of all, because most of the organised elements within Labour that are not actually Labour itself are all anti-Labour. And second of all, it's been picked up on the right-wing media because they're absolutely loving the fact that they can report on, oh, Starmer's facing this massive rebellion. Oh, his party's in chaos. Oh, yeah, you should vote Tory.
Yeah, they're all the same.
So
I don't know. I think there is a middle ground here. I think Johnny Reynolds did it on Question Time last night, where I don't think he went as far as calling for a ceasefire, but he said there should be a pause to allow.
Yeah, but they've said that anyway.
aid.
Sunak said that. In fact, if you listen carefully to what Sunak said in PMQs, like Sunak basically in PMQ said, we know that Israel is breaking international law and we are trying to persuade them not to. Again, won't work. But he wouldn't even be able to have those conversations and try to calm them down if he comes out publicly and attacks them. Look at the way they reacted to the UN Secretary General.
Yeah.
Completely flipped their lids at the slightest hint of criticism, even when it's fairly apparent. And that is what they would do to us.
I saw they clipped what he said because they took it out of context.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Because he did actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
Even to both sides.
He was. But
someone's put in the chat. Christopher, thank you very much for putting that in the chat. People don't understand Netanyahu. He's very Trump-like. You can't influence him if Netanyahu sees you as an enemy.
There's two issues. There is that, absolutely, 100%. And the other side of it as well, he's very much like Trump in that he is being investigated for something that could land him in prison. Having a state of emergency is brilliant to him. And then if in his mind, in 4 months' time, this is how he thinks it's going, and this is how some of those around Netanyahu think it's going to work out. They think they're going to go in, they're going to take out Hamas, and then they're going to get the Palestinian Authority back properly in charge of Palestine, and everything's going to be wonderful. There's going to be peace and all the rest of it. That's how they're thinking. So there is no stopping them.
I don't think that's the plan. I think
it is. No, I know it's the plan.
Are they not going to just annex Gaza? Why would they give it back to the Palestinians? Why wouldn't they just take it?
No, because there's a lot of people, even on Netanyahu's side, who understand that there is no peace without the two-state solution. But the two-state solution is not what we think of it now. Their two-state solution will now be that it will basically just be Gaza with a demilitarized zone, and on their side, not the Israeli side.
Well,
I mean, the two-state solution,
and it's
yeah, yeah, that's the problem. That is the actual two-state solution is now way less likely.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the West Bank, it looks to me a lot like South Africa in the 1980s, where you had these sort of places where the black people could live, and they weren't South Africans at the time. They had no nationality. They had to come into South Africa in order to work from the townships, and I think that's going to be replicated across Gaza. And I think that there should be a one-state solution. I think they should just say, right, we're going to make a new state. It's going to be called Israel-Palestine. And if you want to be Israeli, you can be Israeli. If you want to be a Palestinian, you can be a Palestinian.
Fundamentally doesn't work for the reason why anyone wants either Israel or Palestine to exist.
Yeah, but there's no other way.
Yeah, but that's not a way either. That cannot fundamentally work. Can't work.
It could.
The whole point of Israel is it's the Jewish state. And the whole point of Palestine, is that it is the Arab state that stops Israel filling up too much land in the Middle East.
That's really sad. Well, I mean, when I look at sort of Lebanon, which I mentioned before in one of my videos, they have a system where you can't have two Muslims or two Christians as president and prime minister. It has to be one or the other. There are solutions out there, but I mean, when you say it has to be a Jewish state, I don't see why it would stop necessarily being a Jewish state in the same way that Britain is a Christian state, but there are Muslims who live here, and
but in our system, there's absolutely nothing to stop people of whatever faith running the government. In fact, we've got someone of a different faith running the government now.
Yeah.
The whole point of the Jewish state is it will always be. So anyone who's not Jewish will always be limited in how far up the political ladder they can climb. So you're instantly making Arabs second-class citizens in that. You can't have a one-state. I mean, there might be a one-state solution, but that one-state solution will come as a result of conquest, as a result of people not implementing the two-state solution.
Well, that's
because
what
if
I
you
said.
Look at
that's also what I said in the video. Is like, this isn't what anyone wants, but this is what we might end up with. And if we do end up with it, we need to do X, Y, Z to make sure that the Arab Palestinians are not treated like second-class citizens,
I mean,
but also the Armenians, the Christians, the Ethiopians, the Coptics. There's loads of different religions in Israel, and I don't see why it has to be, why it can't be a Jewish state. We are a Christian state here. We still have
we're not
king.
a Christian state.
No, but we are officially, aren't we? Because the king is the head of the Church.
Yeah,
of
but
England.
that is not a part of government. He has no political power.
We have lawmakers who are there because they're bishops.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not really, are they? They're not really.
They are. They're literally there in the House of Lords.
They're in the House of Lords, where they're supposed to pass everything.
Yeah, because no one cares anymore. But like, maybe in 100 years' time, they'll get to the point in Israel when no one really cares anymore. But in the meantime,
no, because then there's no point. That's it's not like another country where it just happened that most people were of a particular faith. It was created specifically as like a sanctuary, and then it's turned into anything but. But it was made specifically as a sanctuary for that specific people of that specific faith. No other country has been made like that.
Well, Britain was a bit like that.
No,
after Henry VIII, we were a Protestant country. Well, we were Catholic for a bit, and then we were Protestant again. And the Huguenots from France came over here because they were being
Britain wasn't created specifically to be this like sanctuary for these particular, like, the only thing I can think of is Vatican City. Is that a nation? I don't know.
It is a nation, but it's not a member of the UN, has special observer status, just like Palestine.
So that's the only other example
Pakistan.
I can think of.
Pakistan. That was created as somewhere where Muslims could live.
Yeah, that's
but there are people who aren't Muslims
into Bangladesh as well, and then God knows how it's going to get split up in the future.
But it's been done before, where one religion sort of taken over a country and said, we are founding this country on our religion. And Pakistan.
There was already an existing nation. It was the same as anything else. I mean, all nations came about because some chieftain decided they want to be king and cracked enough heads to do it.
Well, I mean, it was part of the British Empire at the time, wasn't it? British India, and it got split into two, and then three. But yeah, I mean, that it's happened before in the past, and I don't think Pakistan is a particularly good country to give as an example because it's been plagued by instability for many, many years. But in its own borders, apart from Kashmir, obviously, which was never part of it to start with, and it wasn't really part of India. It was all up in the air. That sort of idea where you have a nation where people of a particular religion can feel safe, Israel fails in that whole idea. I mean, they live in a country where over 1,000 people got massacred the other week. That's not safe. That's not making people feel secure somewhere in the world. So the very concept of Israel, it's not just that it has to be somewhere where Jews are in charge. It has to be somewhere where Jews feel safe. And for the last 60 years, it hasn't, 70 years, hasn't achieved that.
And it's not going to. Like, the fundamental problem is you've got, like, it is effective like a proxy war. You've got, on the one hand, Iran, who want Israel wiped out. They just want them wiped out. And then on the other hand, I mean, you get the feeling that other Arab states would be fine with it if it could just find a peaceful settlement. Iran fundamentally wants them wiped out. And America, America doesn't want the Arabs wiped out in that part of the world. But at the same time, they're quite clear they're on someone's side. They've picked a side.
But I don't think that Iran is happy to cause instability and fund weapons for Hamas, which is crazy in a way because Hamas are Sunni Muslims, whereas the whole schism between Iran and Saudi Arabia is because Saudi Arabia is Sunni and Iran is majority Shia, and that's been the source of a lot of the political instability in that region for a very, very long time, and it will continue to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's
But
always
I
a mad
can't
thing
see
for
them
me.
coming in for a hot war because they know that if they do, you might end up with a very, very strange situation where Saudi Arabia comes in on the side of Israel because they really hate Iran.
Yeah, but also, I mean, no, they're just going to stay out of this now. I mean, they were quite close to more sort of peaceful terms with Israel, and that'll be thrown into the fire now.
Well, one angry pagan saying, the king made a nod to us pagans in his speech. Thank you very much for the super chat there, one angry pagan. He did. Yeah, he said that he's going to be defender of all faiths. I think
he said that, years and years ago, that he didn't want to be known as defender of the faith, but defender of faiths.
Yeah. And Helen, thank you very much for the super chat. Now, problem in India with Hindu and Muslim. Well, India was set up as a secular state. So the way it all went down in 1947 or 48, 47, I think it was, August 47, was that they said, we're going to have a secular state of India, and then we're going to have a religious state of East and West Pakistan. So a lot of Muslims moved to Pakistan and a lot of this newly formed country, and a lot of Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, Christians moved from what is Pakistan now, into what's now India. And 1 million people died in that process. And it's, if you look at that like a two-state solution to an age-old problem, it was an absolute catastrophe. And those countries are still fighting now. They've got both sides have got nuclear weapons. It's a bit concerning. And now you've got the ultra Hindu nationalists under Modi, the BUF. Yeah. No, that's the British Union of Fascists. Yeah.
Quite close though.
Yeah, it's quite close. But yeah, their party has always been very, very pro Hindu against everybody else, especially Muslims who have felt like second-class citizens in their own country for quite a few years now. So I don't know. I think that you're right that the one-state solution might happen anyway, whether you want it to or not. And then it's up to us to make sure, I mean, us as in the international community.
But the international community is doing nothing.
It's doing nothing now, but in the future, that we
I don't see it ever doing anything.
Pushing for rights for people.
Yeah, but where's the motivation? Ultimately, where's the motivation for anyone? Unless the only time
about South Africa, people have their
no one profited from South Africa's period of apartheid. No, America didn't profit, China didn't profit, Russia didn't profit, no one profited.
But I mean, as it stands, 1 in 5 Israelis are Arab Israelis. And they live in Israel, under the Israeli rule, and they're happy to do so. Well, mostly. And it's quite telling that after the events of October 7th, there wasn't any big riots or kickoffs in the Arab-Israeli community like there had been a couple of years prior. So, I don't know. I'm trying to give a little bit of hope here for what looks like a pretty bloody hopeless situation.
I think it's going to be absolutely terrible. And the problem is, as I say, and people keep talking about this ceasefire thing, someone just saying in the comment, the longer Starmer leaves it, the worse it gets. Honestly, if he was to call for an actual ceasefire, that would be the worst thing he can do. I'm not saying he might be forced into it. It would be the worst thing for him to do. It would be the worst thing for Labour to do. What you've got to ask yourself, why do you want him to call for a ceasefire? It's not going to make a ceasefire happen. But if you call for it, you cannot then call for humanitarian aid. Do you want people to die or not? Because
can't you call for the ceasefire to get the humanitarian aid in?
Yeah, we are doing. Both Labour and Rishi Sunak is doing that. That's what they call their pauses. That is what they're calling for.
Well, I was going to point out that a ceasefire is not going to be agreed to by Hamas. So it doesn't matter what the Israeli government or the IDF do. Hamas are not going to have a ceasefire. They're going to continue firing, even if it's,
You could argue they should maybe put more emphasis on that. But the thing is, Hamas wanted it. I don't actually know in their heads how they thought this was going to pan out. But the reason they committed those atrocities and remember took hostages, like why did they take hostages? Because they needed Israel to come in, wade in. They wanted Israel to flatten Gaza because not that they wanted Gaza flat, because it's not like a Nero thing. Oh, we've got a much better idea for the city. They wanted to draw other Arab states in. They wanted particularly to draw Iran and Hezbollah in.
Yeah.
But like I said, that if that is their thought, I don't know how in their heads that was ever going to work, because if another nation is actually drawn into the war, America will be drawn into it. And America's made that clear now, you know, by moving a couple of aircraft carriers there. They've made it clear that if this widens, if this conflict widens, we'll be part of it.
Yeah.
And who is there? Who's going to stand up to America, the American military in that part of the world?
Oh, no one. I mean,
exactly.
who
So I don't know what's
anyway?
in Hamas's head, but this is the thing. It's because
I think it just. I think there's a bit of that as well, but I just think that Hamas are that they're desperate. This is the last roll of the dice as far as they're concerned.
But either way, they wanted Israel to go in.
It's kind of like death or glory.
Everything that's happening now is what they wanted. And yeah, so of course they wouldn't have a ceasefire because they've been described as a death cult, and that is what they are. They can't be reasoned with.
Yeah. But yeah, it's horrible. It's a horrible situation.
And it's going to get way worse, as I say.
And
this
also,
is why
it's had a really toxic effect on people in the UK. It's empowered anti-Semites, it's empowered Islamophobes, and it's making otherwise reasonable people lose their fucking minds, to be honest with you, mate. I mean, there have been some conversations that have gone on, especially in the media and stuff, and I don't know, on Twitter and things, that you see, and you're just like, oh my God, these people, I thought they were fairly reasonable, and they're being so one-sided about it, and I don't think
this is what I said.
Helpful.
At the Rejoin March, I had a couple of people who watch my channel talking about me, and they were talking about Palestine thing, and I was pointing out, it's like you look at these people and they don't really care about the Palestinians, and because you look at them and because you ask them about anyone else who's in the similar sort of situation. The most famous example would be Uyghur Muslims, but it also applies to people in Yemen who've been having the crap kicked out of them by Saudi Arabia. It's like, why did they never make a fuss about that?
Isn't that whataboutism, though? Isn't that whataboutism? Are you falling foul of whataboutism?
No, that is them specifically. It's the same thing with Ukraine. They've picked sides. It's not that they want peace. It's not that they want people to live in peace. They've just picked the side they want to wipe out the other side.
Yeah,
that's what they've done. So they don't criticize Russia's genocide in Ukraine because Russia's on their side. They don't criticize the abuse of the Uyghur Muslims because that's China, and China's on their side.
Yeah.
So they call
for
where you've got a situation where it isn't one, because with Ukraine and the Uyghur Muslims, that's one-sided. That is one group of people being oppressed by another. There's no two-way process. So when you put it into a two-way process, Israel and Hamas, for example, and it's not just Hamas. We say Hamas as like an umbrella, but there's actually several groups. But when you talk about like the Israeli government and Hamas, they've picked a side. They've picked a side, and that's all there is to it. They don't give a crap. In fact, they're calling. The more deaths, the better, as far as they're concerned.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about how you just mentioned it, how it compares with people's reactions to Ukraine, because in Ukraine you've got some very strange people on the left who say they're on the left, tankies almost, who seem to think that Russia had a right to go in and rape and murder and butcher women and children in Ukraine. They seem to have a right to it because there were Nazis there. That was the excuse. The fact that the president of Ukraine is Jewish is by the by. But okay, so let's follow that logic. So Israel has invaded Gaza, saying that there are terrorists there who actually did attack them. I mean, Ukraine didn't attack Russia. They didn't run in and kill over 1,000 civilians. That never happened.
No.
But I think that without wanting to fall foul of the whole whataboutism thing, I think that consistency would be nice, and seeing something that is
It's
wrong.
essential. If someone's going to say they're a humanitarian, they cannot possibly turn a blind eye to any human rights abuses on that level.
Yeah, no matter who's doing it.
Yeah, because that's these people on that march. One guy said to me, "Well, isn't it just that sort of people have a particular focus? It's like, oh, this is their particular area of interest." It's like, yeah, I can get that, but when they're specifically asked about what about these other people, if you say, "Oh, well, that doesn't matter," then it's like, no, you're not humanitarian. You just want some people to be killed and some other people not to be killed. You've just picked a side.
Yeah. And also, I feel like if we're just going to go back to Israel for a moment, I feel like the Netanyahu government absolutely are loving this. I know this sounds horrible to say, but it's a gift to them. I know Netanyahu himself is not going to come out of this well, because they blame him for the policy failure that led to the invasion
over like a decade.
Yeah, but in general, the ultra right wing, hawkish, war hungry lunatics in the Israeli parliament are like, oh my god, all our Christmases have come at once. No, Hanukkahs. All our Hanukkahs have come at once. So, bit culturally insensitive there, Graham. But yeah, it's and that's not great. I don't like the fact that they're happy. I don't like the fact that Hamas are happy.
Well,
that
this is the problem. You've got a situation where there isn't a good side and a bad side. It's like there's bad people on both sides, and then there's innocents on both sides being caught up in it, which is not happening in any of the other sort of comparable situations, like Yemen and Saudi Arabia. You haven't got Saudi Arabia citizens suffering the same problems that Yemeni citizens are suffering. In Russia, you don't have Russian civilian populations being bombed by Ukraine. All of these other things around the world are entirely one-sided. And then you've got this situation in the Middle East where it's not one-sided at all. It's abuses on both sides. And it's absolutely tragic that then people, whenever you talk about, like with Ukraine and Russia, you can talk about the abuses in Ukraine and no one can say to you, oh, but what about the abuses in Russia? It's because they don't exist, apart from the self-inflicted ones you put on his own people. Whereas with this, if you talk about, like Israel's right to secure their own citizens and secure their borders, what about the innocent lives being lost in Palestine? Yeah. So then you talk about the innocent lives being lost in Palestine. Oh, but what about the innocent lives that are lost in Israel? And it goes back and forth like that, because too few people that have any sort of platform can actually hold both those thoughts in their head, that innocent people on both sides are suffering and have suffered.
Yeah. And when asked whose side am I on, my stock answer is I'm on the side of peace. I'm on the side of the fighting to stop and civilians to stop being killed.
Explicitly is not Hamas. It's not Hezbollah. It's not those cretins who fired that rocket in the hospital, and it's not the Israeli government. Nor is it the Iranian government or the American. I have a bit more sympathy with the Iranian and American governments in that, like, if they suddenly had a change of heart, their own populations are so one-sided on the issue, it's like difficult to do anything. But at the same time, they are still both stoking this.
But yeah, the Houthi Muslims in Yemen, who've been bombed for years now by the Saudis, that whole insurrection of the Houthis, who are Shia Muslims in a Sunni country. Don't forget, Yemen used to be two countries, and then they bodged it together into one. That's being funded by Iran as well. So this is what I'm saying. Like, weirdly speaking, in this situation, it's Iran funding the Houthi rebels. It's Iran funding Hamas, and the two countries fighting against it, Israel and Saudi Arabia. They hate each other apparently, but they're fighting on the same side. It's a very strange, messed up situation, and it's very emblematic of how difficult things are in the Middle East, the birthplace of
I'm not an expert on it, but I just strongly suspect it's really just mostly an anti-American proxy, because Saudi Arabia is quite close to America and Israel obviously is very close.
Yeah, it might be. there was a comment saying, "There's some Guardi. I don't know about you guys, but I'm scared to ask questions. I don't want to offend anybody." And I get that as well. I understand it is getting into this discussion is like walking a tightrope because you don't want to set somebody off and you don't want someone that you're talking to say something that is like problematic. And it's really, really unhelpful when you have people like Richard Madeley on the telly asking Layla Moran if she knew anything about, did you hear anything on the ground about, from your family in Gaza? Did you hear anything about this terrorist attack before it happened? Which is exactly the same mentality as going up to someone who is Jewish in this country and blaming them for the actions of the Israeli government, which is something you would never, ever do to, you wouldn't go to a black person and say, oh, the crimes of the government in Cote d'Ivoire against the northern rebels, it's all your fault. And they'd be like, what's that got to do with me? It's like, well, you're all the same, aren't you? I said, no, that's really racist for you to think that.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and that idea that, if you are Jewish, you need to condemn Israel. And this is where it isn't helpful to use terms like Israel. No, you can condemn the Israeli government, fine. But if someone from another country was saying about our country and saying, Britain needs to do this, Britain needs to do that, and they're actually talking about the Tory party, it would probably piss me off. I mean, there's literally loads of us who are not going to vote Tory in the next election.
Yeah.
Some of us have never
voted
Tory
last time.
Yeah,
you didn't get a majority voting last
time.
Nothing
to do with us. We don't want this. And something I learned very quickly on my travels around the world, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again: you can't judge people by the actions of their governments, because I would hate anyone to judge me by the actions of these Tory scumbags who have been in charge for the last 13 years of abject misery, but they're on the way out. So, that's the good news. One by one, by-election after by-election. And just before we go, Phil, I just wanted to ask, have you reappraised your thinking on when the election is going to be in the light of the little video that the Tories put out this week saying that, intonating they were going to be in for another 52 weeks?
I think Rishi Sunak would like to be in for as long as possible because I think he's just looting. It's whether the party is stable enough to last that long. Because I think that if there's evidence starts to emerge that the longer they leave it, the worse it gets for them, then the party, I mean, he might be happy to just carry on looting, wait till even January 2025, and then, leave, go off, become rich doing something else.
Yeah.
But the Tory MPs who want to fight their seats, if you look at the voting intentionality of the YouGov, again, it's widened for Labour. These sort of things will probably come down again. If we look at it in like 6 months' time, it'll just be another one of these where it's gone up and then down again. But if the Tories think it's sort of stable now, then I don't know. But I just think that if there's signs next year that it's actually getting worse for them, and there's so many flashpoints for them, like you say, this Peter, the Scott Benton by-election may be at the same time for Blackpool South. So that could be another 2 by-elections in February. But the Peter Bone one is Wellingborough's a bellwether seat. It has been Labour. It flips between Labour and the Conservatives. It's mostly Conservative, but it does flip between Labour and the Conservatives, depending on how they're seen nationally.
As Scott Benton, is he out now?
No, they haven't confirmed the suspension yet.
Right. So this is to do with gambling.
I don't know why. And now that Parliament's like prorogue, so that's weird. I don't know why that hasn't happened. But that will happen at some point. I don't know why they rushed the Peter Bone one through and not that one.
John is saying he thinks it's going to be May the 2nd, 2024. Was Peter Bone rushed through though? I mean, oh my God.
Because he failed the appeal and then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
once he failed the appeal.
In terms of when, it was like, because the Standards Committee didn't even carry out the investigation.
Yeah.
So they've just basically rubber stamped it, and then MPs have rubber stamped that. So that was gone through quite quickly, whereas Scott Benson was actually investigated by the Standards Committee.
Okay.
But anyway, Wellingborough's the important one because, again, it's one of those things that Labour will need. Not quite a 20-point swing in this case, And I can see MPs saying to Sunak, look, come February, Labour will have had a 20+ point lead over the Conservatives for like 18 months straight.
Yeah.
With a maximum of 11 months to go before the election. So I think Tory MPs are within their rights to say to Sunak, you need to be able to show progress by February. If you can't show progress by February, then what is the use of you? And if it looks like, not just that Sunak's going to lose in the election, because it already looks like that. If it looks like actually waiting makes it worse, which I think it will for them, then Tory MPs surely are not going to want to wait.
But it's not up to them, is it? It's up to Rishi Sunak, and he doesn't care.
If collectively, it is up to them.
I think
because the next little flashpoint is March, because you've got all this tax pledge nutters who say they're going to vote against the budget unless they get what they want. I don't exactly know what they want, something to do with taxes. But if they don't get what they want from the budget, they say they'll vote against it. So if they vote against it, Rishi Sunak's got, if he can't get a budget through, he's got no government.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of this. It doesn't take that many Tory MPs to rebel if they really want to.
Yeah.
It's whether they want to.
So Labour have just dropped their find your local candidate there. Find your local Labour MP or candidate. This was a suggestion made by someone not a million miles away last year, that they actually do this on their website and put a picture of the MP on the website with an actual blurb. You can see there underneath the blurb about them and their Facebook, Twitter and Instagram links and all of their contact details. So they've done that now for every single Labour, not just MP, but also Labour candidate in the upcoming election. I'll just put that into the chat. It's vote.labour.org.uk. And thank God they've done that. It means that I don't have to. That's shed my workload a little bit. But fabulous. That's actually really, really good of Labour to do that. Took a bit too long, but yeah, got there in the end. And it's great that it's got all the candidates on there as well, so people can look up their candidate of who it's going to be. Because it used to be a bit difficult to try and suss that out in the past. David, thank you very much for the 78 Hong Kong dollars. There should be neither an Israel nor a Palestine. It should be called the Holy Land, and its citizens, religion aside, must live together in love and peace. Yeah, that's a lovely thought.
Have you met people, though? Unfortunately, it's not what occurs.
Phil, you're such a worldly cynic. But yeah, it would be nice if that was the case, and you could have a center of Christianity, of Judaism and Islam, which and all those peaceful religions all coexist.
The thing is, all those people will coexist. They coexist at the moment. It's just you've got arseholes that use any excuse to achieve power.
Yeah.
People will talk about, you'll have atheists who blame religion on all these sort of wars, but it's not. They'd find some other excuse, because they do. You've got plenty of secular wars that get started. All it is megalomaniacs. They just use whatever excuse they can.
It always comes when you say about atheists, it's not like they cause the war because they don't believe in God, but I think that they use the same powers of charisma and doctrine and sort of mental abuse, I like to call it, on people to make them fall for absolute nonsense. You look at Trump. You got a lot of Christians who support Trump, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
that he is the personification of the biblical devil.
Yeah.
Why are you following him? But there you go. Graham, you missed my super chat earlier about potential turnout for the next general election. I'm very sorry about that. I'm going to have a quick look now. They need to make a Starmer starting a podcast. Oh, here you go. Yeah, sorry, One Angry Pagan. We missed one of your super chats. Thank you very much for it. Really want turnout for the general election to be surprisingly high next year. Dreaming, I know, but how high do you think it will be, though? Very curious. My view on this, I don't think it's going to be surprisingly high. I think that a lot of younger people, a lot more younger people than ever before, are going to vote because they're sick of the Tories. I think a lot of older Tory voters will do what they did in Tamworth. They'll do what they did in Mid-Beds, and they just won't turn out. They just won't turn up. They just won't go out and vote for anyone. What do you think, Phil? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily changes a great deal. I think it's just the voting behaviour that will change.
I think a lot more
Because
young people are going to come out for this one.
I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure. I think that sort of apathy will still be there. I do hope a lot more do when 16 and 17-year-olds get the vote. And I don't just mean the 16 and 17-year-olds, but the ones who are like 18, 19, 20 and so on, because it will put more of an emphasis on young people getting more of a voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that might motivate them. But I'm not sure, because, when the Conservatives say things like, oh, people aren't necessarily sold on Labour, well, that's sort of true in many ways as well. So I don't see, to get a higher turnout, you need less apathy. You need a load of people going, this is going to make a huge difference. Whereas really what people are just voting for is to stop the pain.
John's saying in the chat, more younger people will vote, but overall turnout will be lower at 1997 again. I agree. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Looking at my crystal ball, I think that's
well, there'll certainly be a lot of people who voted Conservative in 2019, I think, staying at home because they won't bring themselves to vote for anyone else.
Yeah.
And obviously you'd feel incredibly stupid voting to sustain the current government.
Yeah. Yeah. And John saying we had all this in 1996. Not many are bothered about Labour, etc., etc.
Yeah.
When they were trying to spin the by-election.
Well, they had a much more charismatic leader as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my word. Anyway, political education would help too. We didn't get it in school, so I had no clue who to vote for. Great school. Yeah, good point. As someone with an A and A level in politics and a degree in politics, I would like more people to learn about politics, but some people just don't care, and I have to accept that and get on with my life, even though it matters to us all, really. So, Phil, I think we're going to call it a day. Thank you very much for joining us on this quite intense episode of The Agenda, where we kind of we talked a lot more about Israel than I thought we were going to, but all interesting points. And thanks to everyone in the chat, and thanks to everyone in the chat for being so reasonable as well. And I didn't have to delete any messages, which is incredible. So thank you for being a good audience and not getting us into trouble or yourself into trouble in these matters. So we'll be back at 9 o'clock tonight for the Labour Social. I don't know who's joining us tonight. Apparently Aid's not feeling very well. I think Tansky's going out tonight. So but we might have Josh. Will you be around tonight, Phil?
I will probably be around tonight, yes.
Yes. Okay, so at least me and Phil will be here to entertain you. So we'll see you on the same back channel at 9 o'clock tonight. And until then, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for the super chat. Thanks for all the great chat. And until next time, hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.